Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of absolute precision.
Right. It feels very binary. We find a lot of comfort in that.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, you go to the hospital, they do the imaging, and it shows that jagged white line on a black background. And the doctor just points to it and says, there it is, broken.
It categorizes your pain into something tangible, something we can actually manage.
Yeah, but the moment you step out of that exam room and actually look at the medical terminology written on your chart, that comforting precision just completely fractures.
Oh, totally.
I mean, we are looking at a linguistic landscape that is honestly a graveyard of 19th century philosophies just colliding with 21st century habits.
It really is. It's the definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Right, so today we're taking a deep dive into the hidden mechanical logic behind the medical terms that you hear every single day. We've got a great stack of sources, medical history records, terminology textbooks, linguistic debates, and our mission today is to demystify the rigid grammatical rules that birthed the names of the machines we rely on.
And, explore how modern medicine is actively breaking those exact same rules today.
Because while everyone knows what an EKG or a CT scan is, almost no one knows the rigid 19th century rules that gave them those names.
Yeah, and this isn't just some dry grammar lesson. It's really a story about a historical rebellion against human subjectivity in medicine. It's driven by this obsessive quest to turn the fleeting processes of the human body into a permanent, undeniable physical record.
Well, before we get into the rebellion and how all the rules are breaking down, we should probably establish what the textbook rules actually are.
That's a good place to start.
Because there is a remarkably strict three-part system derived from Greek that dictates how we're supposed to describe visualizing the body.
Yeah, the entire system revolves around three specific suffixes. First, you have allogram, which comes from the Greek word gramma, meaning something written or drawn. In medicine, this is the final product.
Okay.
It's the static image, the wavy tracing, the physical piece of evidence itself.
Like the actual piece of paper or the film that you can physically hold in your hand?
Precisely that. Then you have allograph, which comes from graphene, to write or draw. And this designates the instrument, the physical machine, the hardware that is actually producing the record.
Got it. So the machine is the graph.
Right. And finally, you have allography, which names the process, the technique, or the overarching procedure of using the instrument to produce the record.
To put it simply, you use an allograph to perform allography, and the result you get is an allogram.
That is the clean logic of it, yeah.
I actually think of it a bit like making your morning coffee.
Yeah.
So the coffee maker sitting on your counter is the allograph.
Yeah.
The actual act of brewing the coffee, like the procedure you're running, is the allography.
I love that analogy.
And then the hot cup of coffee that you actually hold and drink, the final product you want, is the makeogram.
That is a perfect framework. The machine, the process, the product.
So let's apply this to a real medical example from our sources, like mammography.
Okay, yeah.
If we follow the strict rule, mammography is the overarching screening process. It uses a mammograph, which is the specific piece of hardware, that X-ray unit that carefully compresses the tissue, to produce a mammogram, which is the final X-ray image of the breast tissue.
Exactly. And looking at the origins of that specific procedure reveals something really fascinating about how resilient these linguistic rules are compared to medical opinions.
Wait a minute.
Well, a German surgeon named Albert Salomon pioneered this foundational work back in 1913. He used early X-ray technology to examine roughly 3,000 mastectomy specimens just to identify exactly how breast cancer appeared on film.
Which, wait, doing that in 1913 meant he was working with incredibly primitive X-ray tubes.
Oh, incredibly primitive.
He couldn't just screen living patients the way we do now, right? Not without exposing them to massive, unsafe doses of radiation just to see the soft tissue.
Right, he had to excise the tissue first to get a clear image.
And the scale of analyzing 3,000 specimens under those conditions is just staggering.
It was a...
But, a naming system this rigid doesn't just spontaneously appear in a hospital out of nowhere. It had to be imported from somewhere else because these suffixes, graphy, weren't invented by doctors.
No, not at all. They were ordinary Greek combining forms that were already deeply embedded in the English language.
Like photograph.
Right, photograph, telegraph, phonograph. They described mechanical devices that captured reality. Medicine adopted this terminology systematically in the 19th century because physicians suddenly experienced this massive proliferation of physical recording instruments.
The Industrial Revolution hitting the clinic.
Exactly. They needed a standardized vocabulary for devices that could physically inscribe a bodily process onto paper.
And this is where the history gets incredibly colorful. So in 1847, a German physiologist named Carl Ludwig invents the kymograph.
Yes.
And the mechanism of this thing is just brilliant in its simplicity. It's a rotating brass cylinder wrapped in paper, and that paper is coated in a fine layer of soot.
Just black soot, yeah.
Right. Ludwig connected a tiny stylus to a cannula inserted into an artery. So as the blood pulsed, the pressure mechanically moved the stylus, physically scratching a white wave into the black soot as the drum rotated.
It translates an invisible, transient biological force blood pressure into a permanent physical line. The kymograph is arguably the first true porograph device in physiology. It was built specifically to write a bodily signal onto a permanent medium, producing a kymogram.
Then you have the French physiologist Etienne Jules Maret working in Paris in the 1860s. And he develops what he explicitly calls the graphic method.
Yes, the graphic method.
He takes this concept and makes it portable. In 1860, he builds the sphygmograph. You would strap this complex little mechanism of levers and springs to your wrist, and it would trace your pulse wave onto a strip of paper, creating a sphygmogram.
Which was revolutionary at the time.
It was. But what stands out to me is Maret's motivation. He didn't build this just to be innovative. He built it because he fundamentally distrusted human observation.
Oh, completely. He was leading a direct rebellion against what was known as narrative medicine.
Narrative medicine, right.
Yeah, before these machines, estimating a pulse was entirely subjective. A physician would feel your wrist and verbally describe the pulse as bounding, or thready, or weak.
Which means something different to every single doctor.
Exactly. Murray recognized that human senses are flawed, memory is unreliable, and those verbal descriptions vary wildly from doctor to doctor. He demanded mechanical, objective proof. The scratch on the paper was undeniable truth.
It's the ultimate pursuit of objectivity. And that exact same impulse, the demand for undeniable visual evidence, drove the adoption of the next massive leap in medical technology.
The X-ray.
Right. November 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen is experimenting with a cathode ray tube in his lab in Würzburg, Germany. He notices that a screen painted with barium platinocyanide is glowing across the room, even though his tube is encased in heavy black cardboard.
He realizes he stumbled onto a new kind of invisible ray.
Yeah, and a few weeks later, he places his wife Anna Bertha's hand between the tube and a photographic plate. And the resulting image shows the dark shadows of her bones and her metal wedding ring, while all the soft tissue is nearly transparent.
It is arguably the most famous medical image in history.
It really is.
And what is linguistically significant here is how the medical community reacted to it. They didn't invent a new, complex anatomical term from scratch for this. They immediately called it a radiograph.
They just adapted what they had.
Right. They took the Latin root for radiation or rays and plugged it directly into Maret's existing linguistic convention.
Because the philosophical groundwork was already laid. Something in the body produces a signal, an instrument captures it, and the output is a fixed record a clinician can study after the fact.
It fits the formula perfectly.
But as this mechanical logic caught on and the tech advanced, it led to fierce battles over who actually deserved the credit. Because if you invent the machine, you get to name it. And the most intense priority dispute revolves around the electrocardiogram.
Oh, the history of the EKG or ECG is just a masterclass in how terminology gets cemented in medicine.
Let's talk about Willem Einthoven.
Right. So in the early 1900s at Leiden University in the Netherlands, Einthoven developed the string galvanometer.
Okay.
It was an instrument sensitive enough to catch the minute electrical currents generated by the human heart and translate them into a wavy tracing. Einthoven is actually the one who identified and assigned the letters to the waves, the P, Q, R, S, and T waves that cardiologists still analyze today.
The physical scale of Einthoven's setup is just mind-blowing to me. Like, we think of an EKG today as a little cart they roll up to your hospital bed.
Yeah, tiny little monitor.
But Einthoven's original machine weighed roughly 600 pounds. It required a team of 5 people just to operate it.
5 people.
The immense weight came from these massive electromagnets that actually required their own water cooling jackets. He suspended a microscopic silver-coated quartz string between these magnets.
Incredible precision.
Yeah, and as the heart's current passed through the string, it twitched, and that cast a shadow onto a moving reel of photographic paper. But here's the craziest part. To even conduct the current, the patient had to sit with both arms and their left leg submerged in large buckets of salt water.
Buckets of salt water in a hospital.
Literally, they had a cable running from his laboratory to the patients in a hospital across the street just to capture these readings.
It was a monumental piece of engineering, and it earned Einthoven the 1924 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine because he produced the first practical, reliable electrocardiogram.
Wait, but looking at the timeline of this, there is a gap in our sources that doesn't quite make sense to me.
What's that?
Einthoven gets the Nobel in 1924 for work he did in the early 1900s. But didn't a British physiologist, Augustus Waller, actually record the first human ECG all the way back in 1887?
He did, yes.
That's more than a decade before Einthoven. So why doesn't Waller get the glory? Why isn't it Waller's wave?
Well, it highlights a really crucial reality about how medical history remembers its pioneers. Waller used a device called a capillary electrometer.
Okay.
It consisted of a tiny glass tube containing mercury resting on sulfuric acid. When the heart's electrical voltage changed, the mercury meniscus would subtly bulge and move.
That sounds very analog.
It was, and the movement was incredibly sluggish. It couldn't accurately track the rapid electrical spikes of a heartbeat, meaning the tracing it produced was distorted. It was practically unreadable for clinical purposes.
So it wasn't a true pantograph instrument in the sense of producing a refined, usable record?
Exactly that. Furthermore, Waller himself was highly skeptical that his technique would ever have any clinical utility.
Really?
Yeah, he viewed it mostly as a physiological curiosity. Einthoven, however, saw the clinical potential. By replacing that sluggish mercury with the microscopic hyper-responsive quartz string, Einthoven made the device practical.
So it's about making it actually work for doctors.
Right. In medical history, credit and terminology consistently follow the practical refinement, not just the initial flawed demonstration. Einthoven gave doctors a readable eogram, so he got the Nobel Prize and he got the naming rights.
He cements the textbook rules. You've got the electrocardiograph making the electrocardiogram.
Right.
But fast forward to today, and modern clinical English is completely shattering that clean 19th century logic.
It really is. The definition we've mapped out is much tidier in textbooks than it is in a busy hospital corridor. In modern clinical speech, the classical suffix system is collapsing entirely.
Yeah, clinicians rarely say, I'm sending you to the electrocardiograph, referring to the physical machine. They just say, get an EKG.
Right.
They're conflating the machine, the process, and the output into one generic piece of shorthand. But the radiology exception is the one that really stands out in the sources.
Oh, radiology is the one major branch where the breakdown of the rules is glaring. The image is a radiograph. The process is radiography. So following our logic, the machine should simply be a radiograph. But English usage stubbornly refuses to supply that clean noun. Medical professionals just call it an X-ray machine or a radiographic unit.
It's like we collectively decided the rule was just too weird to apply to the machine itself.
Pretty much.
But the moment you introduce modern, computerized imaging, this 19th century logic completely shatters. Take computed tomography, the CT scan.
Yeah.
This was developed in the late 1960s and early 70s by Godfrey Hounsfield, an electrical engineer, and Alan Cormack, a physicist who actually shared the 1979 Nobel Prize for it.
With the first scan in London in 1971.
Right. Now, the root word here is tomos, which means slice or cutting. The machine rotates around the patient taking multiple X-rays, and a computer calculates them into a 3D cross-sectional slice of the body.
So if we apply our strict linguistic rules to this new technology, the process is tomography. The machine performing it should be a tomograph, and the final cross-sectional image the doctor views should be a tomogram.
But nobody says, I'm going to the tomograph to get a tomogram. We just say CT scan. Why did we abandon the rules?
It just comes down to sheer convenience and the democratization of medical language. Words like CT scan and MRI scan displaced the classical suffix system because they were simpler to articulate.
They're easier to say.
Yeah, and immediately understood by the general public. An MRI breaks the pattern entirely. There is no such thing as a magnetic resonance graph or a magnetic resonance gram.
The word scan just invaded and took over the whole vocabulary.
It did. And this has actually sparked a fascinating live debate among medical educators today. It is essentially a prescriptivist versus descriptivist debate wearing a lab coat.
Like, should we even teach this anymore?
Exactly. Should medical schools continue teaching students this rigid three-way graphy framework when it falls apart the second they step onto a clinical floor?
What's the argument for keeping it?
The educators who advocate for keeping the classical system argue that understanding the underlying structural logic of the language gives students a necessary foundation, even if daily usage is messy.
That makes sense.
But to truly understand why the adagraph, that concept of a permanent physical record, was so revolutionary in the first place, we have to look at what happens when you remove it from the equation entirely.
Okay, to navigate that, we need a quick cheat sheet for some neighboring prefixes and suffixes.
Let's do it.
So you have prefixes that define the source of the data. Electro, meaning an electrical source. Echo for sound waves bouncing back. Angio, referring to vascular structures or blood vessels.
Right.
And you have suffixes like anemometry or natometer, which denote taking a physical measurement, like spirometry measuring your lung capacity.
But the most important cousin to our enodography suffix is atavekipy or hetscope.
Like an endoscope or a microscope?
Yes. A foundscope is engineered for live, real-time visualization. When a physician uses an endoscope, they are looking directly at the interior of the body in that specific, fleeting moment.
Just watching it happen.
Exactly. The instrument does not inherently produce a permanent image. A natograph, on the other hand, exists specifically to produce that durable record, the anagram.
And sitting right on the boundary between these two concepts is fluoroscopy. Historically, it was a live viewing X-ray technique. Instead of a single burst of X-rays hitting a photographic film to create a radiograph, a continuous beam of X-rays passed through the patient and hit a fluorescent screen, allowing the doctor to watch the organs moving in real time.
Which is incredibly useful for certain procedures.
But because it was live viewing, it didn't create a permanent physical record. Which leads us to an astonishing historical failure mentioned in the sources: the shoe store fitting machines.
Oh, this is a sobering illustration of how a linguistic distinction can literally mask a biological hazard.
It really is. So, from the 1920s all the way into the 1950s, retail shoe stores across the US and the UK utilized fluoroscopes to sell shoes.
Just right there in the shoe store.
Yeah, they were these large wooden cabinets placed right in the middle of the sales floor. Customers, mostly children, would put their feet into an opening at the base while wearing a new pair of shoes. The machine would fire a continuous beam of X-rays up through their feet.
Unbelievable.
And there were 3 viewing ports on top. One for the child, one for the parent, and one for the salesman. To look at the bones wiggling inside the shoe to guarantee a perfect fit.
It was treated as a high-tech novelty. But if we analyze this through the linguistic logic we've been discussing, we can pinpoint exactly why it was such a disaster. Because it was a fluoroscope, scope. It was a live viewing device.
There was no weak rim.
There was no durable film record being generated. If a patient went to a hospital for a radiograph, a physical piece of film was created, filed away in a medical chart, and tracked by physicians.
There's a paper trail.
Right. But in a shoe store, the moment you stepped off the machine, the glowing image vanished. Out of sight, out of mind. Because there was no permanent physical record being filed away, there was no administrative mechanism forcing anyone to track the cumulative radiation exposure these children and salesmen were receiving.
The biological dangers of ionizing radiation weren't fully appreciated by the public yet, sure, but the lack of a durable record allowed the danger to remain completely invisible.
Exactly. The absence of an eogram meant an absence of accountability.
Which brings all this historical theory down to your everyday life. Because understanding this suffix system isn't just trivia to impress your doctor. It is a remarkably practical tool for you as you navigate your own healthcare and insurance.
It provides immense decoding power. Imagine you are reviewing a referral form or a medical bill, and you encounter an unfamiliar term. Let's say coelography.
Okay.
You might have absolutely no idea that the prefix silo refers to the salivary glands.
I mean, most people wouldn't.
But because you understand the suffix system, the moment you see salography, you instantly know the fundamental nature of the appointment. You know it is a diagnostic procedure, you know it will involve a mechanical instrument, and you know it will produce a durable record or image that a radiologist or physician will review later.
You've decoded the structure of the event without needing a medical degree.
Exactly.
It also helps patients avoid some incredibly common scheduling nightmares. Administrative staff often see patients who confuse a scilogram with a salography.
Oh, all the time.
An appointment for a mammogram is technically an appointment for mammography, the actual physical procedure that produces the image. The mammogram is just the result you get a week later.
Right.
Knowing the difference clarifies insurance paperwork, billing, and scheduling. It stops you from showing up to an imaging center for a 45-minute procedure when you really just wanted to pick up a copy of your results.
It bridges the communication gap between the patient's lived experience and the clinical staff's rigid administrative structures. It removes friction from a system that is, let's be honest, already stressful enough.
Yeah, it really is. Well, we have journeyed a long way today. From Carl Ludwig's soot-covered brass cylinders in 1847 through 600-pound water-cooled ECG machines to the modern instantaneous clarity of a CT scan.
It's an incredible evolution.
We've seen how a 19th century rebellion against human subjectivity, that deep distrust of our own senses, created a specialized language demanding permanent objective evidence.
But as we look at how medical records function today, there is one final irony here for you to think about the next time you log into your patient portal.
Oh, our contemporary elograms are almost never physical printouts on paper or film anymore. An electrocardiogram today is a digital file. A radiograph is a display of pixels on a high-definition monitor. The physical paper strip, the heavy silver film, is basically dead.
It all just exists in the cloud.
Exactly. But think back to Etienne Jules Marais and his Figmograph. The entire foundational purpose of inventing the graphic method in the 19th century was to create a permanent physical object, something you could hold in your hand precisely to overcome the transient, fleeting nature of human memory and perception.
Right, he wanted proof.
So what happens to the core philosophy of the elogram when our medical records are now just transient, alterable pixels on a screen? If the record only exists as digital code on a server, susceptible to being overwritten, corrupted, or deleted, is it still the permanent, objective, physical truth that those 19th century pioneers were so desperate to capture?
That is wild. If an aidrogram isn't drawn or written in the physical world, is it even an allogram at all?
It's a good question. That is definitely a thought to mull over the next time you're reviewing a scan on your phone. Keep questioning the words you use every day, because even the most rigid medical jargon has a messy, profoundly human history behind it. The next time you look at imaging, remember that clean binary picture isn't just showing you your bones or your heart. It is showing you a linguistic landscape that is still, wonderfully, a bit murky. Thanks for diving deep with us.